CountryWide Connect with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam-Lamp.
Our next guest, Walt Cavendish, yes, rural candidate for the Waikato, famously quit Federated Farmers, 2 weeks ago, and is now rejoined Federated Farmers.
And he's had a shave.
And he's got a lovely cheese cutter on as well. Walt, g'day mate, welcome to the show.
How are you? I'm pleased I could make it. I've just finished drying off this morning, so just in time. Good way to celebrate.
That's your last day. That's your last day then?
Yeah, it is, of actually having to milk and things like that. So we had the vets come in and do it this year. I did it last year, and it's hard work. So anyone that's doing it themselves, I've got a lot of respect because it's hard work.
All right. Okay, well, let's start with Federated Farmers. You famously quit, and then you famously rejoined. What's going on here?
Gee, you're well informed, aren't you?
You keep us well informed, thank you, Walt, on social media.
I watched your Facebook page.
Yeah, look, you are absolutely correct. So what actually happened was that after that thing went down on that Friday with Fair for Farmers and API and that I still reference it as a hit job, Feds reached out, and so we had some conversations, which I wasn't really getting. When I was reaching out, they wouldn't talk to me. But all of a sudden, when that went down, being willing to talk, and they've come to the conclusion that there are some real issues with our domestic pork sector, and they're willing to help. And so if they're willing to help, it would be silly of me not to sort of look at how we can work with them. And, this idea of maybe setting up a pork or pork poultry combined industry group within Federated Farmers, that's an opportunity not to sneeze at, because anything we can do to affect change, we've got to do.
Walt, do you believe that you've set a new standard for how farmers need to get Federated Farmers to pay attention to things, or should they go through the formal democratic remit process?
Oh, look, I was flying by the seat of my pants, really. I wouldn't take too much, didn't take too much pleasure in it, because there's a lot of good people in Federated Farmers. But I think one thing that's probably fair to say is I think the Federated Farmers process could do with a good review about how things come from the ground up and affect that change. I mean, we're in the modern day today. Perhaps there's other ways that these conversations could occur and listen to farmers, because I'm not convinced that everyday farmers that are members of Feds understand the process to do remits and things like that.
It's interesting, though. It's hard to escape, as Sarah said, it's hard to escape the conclusion that a little bit of Facebook, a little bit of media attention certainly focused the minds of the executive and some of the policymakers of Federated Farmers.
Yeah, I think, I think they were nervous, to be fair. Well, that's what I understood. There was some nervousness about what will Walt say next. And, at the end of the day, the only thing I really cared about was the issue. That's all I care about. I don't really care too much about anything else.
Walt, I understand what that's like, because it's similar for us as well.
Yeah. Oh, look, people love controversy, and, you just got to use the tools that you've got at your thing. And, I tried other ways, and I sent emails asking if the national executive would support the Fair for Farmers or communicate. Got a pushback on that, and I thought, well, bugger this, there must be another way. And so I went down the road. Some will agree with me and others won't, but it certainly shook Federated Farmers, I'd say.
On Fair for Farmers, though, Walt, you've disassociated yourself from that organisation. What was it about, or what part of the organisation did you really have concerns about? Because we've spoken to them, and they were reasonably I suppose conciliatory, were they, when we did the interview? It didn't sound as I suppose you talked about the hit job. It didn't sound quite as bad when we were talking to them.
Oh, look, I've got a lot of time for Rainer, and I make that absolutely clear. But the problem I had is 2.5 years ago, I did seek some assurances around the relationship with a couple of people in their position at SAFE. And I mean, if they'd said to me, look, they were part of the campaign there and then, would I have gone ahead? I don't know, but I would have liked to have thought I would have been able to make that decision. I don't believe that they're out there to stop production and things like that. The message that I've always seen come to me, and I've helped present, is application of domestic standards to imports. And I just think that, I think there's a lot of good people involved in Fair for Farmers in particular, and there's some still good people there on their Facebook page representing those positions.
Walt, I just do want to dig into this so-called hit job, because the lady in question has also been involved in another hit job, which is starting to look like it's got an interconnected trail, if you know who I'm speaking about, the Substack author Arnie O'Brien, who recently did that on the TVNZ Reporter, joining the dots and her affiliations with a gentleman that will be on the show later. Do you believe that this is a new way of doing politics in New Zealand, and now you're running as an independent candidate, that if we really want to move the dial, we have to go to these extremes?
I think, without giving any names away, I think you'd be familiar that at Federated Farmers, they've got some pretty big professionals in the sort of positions that know how to operate. And I think it would be fair to say that there was a lot of similarities between Federated Farmers' release and that Substack. And whether or not, I couldn't say that it was written by the same person, but I get the impression, because when you sort of raise some questions around some of the issues, there was a lot of shock. And certainly when you asked if there was any communication between the two, I think the facial expression gave it away. But I think they just use any mechanism they can really to sort of turn the dial. I think, to be fair, we'd probably put quite a bit of pressure, and Feds are under a lot of pressure on the GE issue as well. That's a fair thing to say, I think. And I guess they've never really had this pressure because, as you've said, Facebook and that's never really been weaponised, if you want to put it like that, to sort of push movements. And I think it was just a different way of skinning the cat, so to speak, that we've been able to manage.
It's for us as independent observers here on CountryWide Connect, it's been an absolutely fascinating 2 or 3 weeks or month since this has kind of blown up and the whole thing and all the twists and the turns. It's certainly been very, very interesting to watch and see the reaction to Feds, I must say, by Feds, to this is again really interesting, because I think you're right when you said that, they're used to probably being the big dog in the room, and to see them actually make a change like that is quite significant. Just coming back to and
all while Wayne's been overseas.
Well, not quite all while he's been overseas, So coming back, so do you now have a position within Feds any way, shape or form? Or are you just a member? This new group they're talking about, is it going to be at executive level for pork and poultry?
Look, so no, I'm not an executive. I missed the boat on that because I resigned, and I was quite looking forward to standing for something here in the Waikato, because I do believe Feds need better communication going out and going in. But this industry group would be the same as beef and lamb, or beef and meat and fibre, or goats or dairy or whatever, is my understanding of what they would be looking at doing. And ultimately that would have members on the National Council, and I guess a couple of times a year that industry group would come together to have some robust conversations. So I'm just a member at the moment, and probably they don't want me too far up the chain, I would dare say.
Well, we couldn't possibly comment. Surprising that there's not one already, because if there was, then there would be policy work being done around it. Maybe it comes under another, I don't know, have to dig in deep, I suppose.
Well, they say there's only about 30 pig producers in Feds. There's about mid-60s. There's about 60 commercial farms in New Zealand. 58 of them are pig care accredited. So whether or not there's enough to have an industry group, I note there's goats, and I don't know how many members they have in the goat industry group. But maybe it's something to do with numbers. But certainly, I think it's something very much that we should look into, and I think we would sort of save ourselves a lot of this backwards and forwards, and if we were able to sit around the table and have some of these difficult conversations about the decisions that need to be taken.
Well, with regards to your political stance now running as an independent in the Waikato, will you be diving in with this interest into the Commodities Levies Act and how the difference between industry groups and Federated Farmers operate from a funding mechanism and an advocacy mechanism?
I hadn't really thought too much. I mean, I've always
It's all
been
right.
quite,
You can say thank you later.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've always been quite pleased, though, that feds are not levy funded, because the problem with a levy funded board like Beef and Lamb New Zealand or Dairy, the only way to send a message is to cut yourself off and not produce anything. At least with feds, you can resign and they lose a membership and a funding. And if enough people do that, you can send a message. Whereas the levy board, very hard to change anything there, I would think.
Just on your independent candidacy for the Waikato, is it purely independent, or are you thinking of this becoming maybe a bigger organisation, some sort of farmers' party, anything like that?
No. There's enough parties, and I think New Zealanders are sick to death of the party political system, because you're accountable to the party bureaucracy. I think people want us to go back and have accountability back to the electorate, and even the electorate MPs today. You know, they ultimately, I mean, you ask them, what have you done for the electorate? And they'll say, oh, well, we got the Indian Free Trade Agreement. Yeah, that's good. That's what National got. But what have you done for us? And they just don't seem to do anything. And I think that it's time for people to really have a think about, what do you want to see in your parliament and how do you want to affect change? And we just go red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. We're not getting any better off. So I think it's time for new ideas. So yeah, basically straight independent, no party, nothing like that.
Well, there's a lot of talk about it ending up being purple with red and blue mixing together in the middle at the moment, Walt. But I totally agree with you around that. There's a lot of the list keeping their powder dry in regards to what they need to do. And those really good MPs that I believe stack around for a really long time are those that dedicate a lot of time in the electorate.
Look, I think that, when the going gets tough for you as a person, you've got trouble with MSD or the super or the health or the education, it's your electorate MP that'll do the heavy lifting for you. And, electorate MP is exactly that. They're the workhorse in this electorate to help you when you've got a problem. And I think more people need to understand the work of an electorate MP, because party MP, you're accountable to the party, and that's the end of it. I mean, and then you get thrown out as an electorate MP, for example, and then after the election you find that MP that you threw out is sitting there on the party list. I just don't think that's acceptable.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people who are very, very upset about that, but that's MMP, and we've had a couple of cracks at changing it, and so far no one wants to, so that's the system we've got. Hey, Walt, great to have you on the show, mate. Really, really appreciate it. Good luck. Thanks for coming on, and we'll keep in touch.
CountryWide Connect with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam-Lapp.